Hey everyone, this is Jun,
And I'm Daniel,
and we are Korean.
American.
Is that
June, I'm having an identity crisis.
Yeah.
Am I
Am I
Korean or
American?
American? Oh,
wow.
it's happening.
Yeah.
This podcast might just need to become Korean. June, I have a story I want to share.
Yeah, what is it?
So when I first told my parents that this was maybe 3 years ago,
To 2020.
that my wife and I, Christina and I, were considering moving to Korea. Their first question was why. So many people from Korea are still trying to move to America, right? So meanwhile, why would you be going back, right? Ultimately, they supported our decision. But there was a second thing. The second thing that they asked me was, aren't you concerned North Korea could invade at any moment, right? And I think as a modern Korean, I'd love to know your thoughts on that. But all of this is to say, I think, is this pretty classic thing that's discussed amongst immigrants. Is I think when someone leaves a country, they take that culture with them, and they almost are a time capsule of their home country at that time. So, my parents emigrated from Korea to America in 1975. And so now I know I didn't realize this until, spending more time in modern Korea. But the Korea I thought growing up, everything I thought about what Korea was, the values they had, etc., even the language, it's a 1975 Korea mindset.
You were like in a time capsule.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And I think in general, and this will probably maybe offend modern day Koreans or maybe not, but I think this is what I believe. I think Korean Americans more traditionally embody like that old school Korean mentality that, we think Korea is more than modern Koreans. Who in a way are like more capitalistic and American than a lot of Americans are, right? And so not that that's all what America versus Korea is, but that like very money driven capitalistic mentality, I think that is a lot of what modern day Korea is. Whereas, the more traditional values maybe of like family and hard work and respect and not just focused on money, I think that's the mentality that I feel like a lot of Korean Americans grew up having. So anyway, are you scared of North Korea invading at any moment? And what, in general, any initial thoughts about this topic?
I think those are one of the things that the concerns are very valid, though you have to live your life. So there's no other choice but to just get numb. For instance, let's say a family member decided to move to the US. A typical Korean parent would say, "Aren't you scared of the gunshots?" Right? But I mean, it is valid, right? It's a threat, but you can't live your life like that anyways. So you just get numb, you just get used to it. I think it's one of those things.
Yeah.
I don't want to say it's any less serious than what your parents thought, but like, what are you gonna do, right?
Do you think that's true? Like, just more objectively speaking,
Yeah.
the chances of North Korea attacking South Korea today in 2023, it is less than it was in 1975, right?
But who knows after seeing Russia invading Ukraine and all that.
June, that's exactly what my parents said.
Yeah, I have a 1975 mindset.
June, you have the 1975 Korean mentality.
But I want to say that a lot of Koreans might not disagree.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
It's pretty imminent.
would you think that's a prevailing sentiment amongst modern Koreans, or?
It's like lingering there, but you tend to not think about it,
I see.
right? It's the same as like earthquakes for Japanese people, right? Like earthquakes happen every time in Japan, but you just get used to it, right? I remember it's so funny that we mentioned Japan on almost every episode.
Sorry, June, you mentioned Japan almost every episode.
I mentioned, yeah. It was 2011, so right after the Fukushima earthquake.
Yeah.
I went to a Japanese company to intern there for about 3 months, I think. And then, so it was because it was right after the big earthquake. You have like those, what do you call them? Like, there are earthquakes that
aftershocks.
Yeah, sort of like aftershocks. And they were still happening, right? I was so, like, the first time when I was in the office, at one point everyone's phone started ringing, and then it was like a caution alert, right,
Yeah.
for earthquake. And then after that, after like 15 seconds, the buildings started shaking.
Oh wow,
Yeah,
that's
and I
not
was
much
like,
time
and I
warning.
was freaking out,
Yeah.
right? And then everyone was just laughing at me.
Yeah.
The Japanese people,
Yeah.
because it's like their everyday life.
I
They
see.
just have to get used to it.
Okay.
Anyways,
No, I think there was a survey on North Korea in particular, which is not what I wanted to focus on. But I remember there was a news article I read, I think during COVID. There was a question, should South Korea send COVID vaccines to North Korea? And I think the prevailing sentiment amongst Koreans was like, and of course it's divided alongst age. I think the older you are, the more maybe you'd like to support North Korea is the feeling. But I remember that the respondents were like, no, we're struggling. We might not even have enough for ourselves. Like, why would we even care about North Korea, right? And I think it's because now, like, 2 generations have been removed. My grandfather passed away 10 years ago, having never seen at least 3 of his sisters who never left North Korea, right? For over 60 years, right? That's obviously trauma and really sad historically. But, now when you're so far removed from having any direct connection to North Korea, I can understand why they might not be as sympathetic. Yeah.
That's interesting because there's definitely one factor where if you have direct family in North Korea, you might have different feelings towards North Korea. But when you said the older generation might have
More sympathy
towards North Korea, I don't think I would necessarily agree because your view towards North Korea is very tied to your political views.
I see.
And the more conservative you are, you're probably less pro North Korea. And the more older generations tend to be more conservative. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
So
that all
it's
makes
very,
sense to me.
Yeah, I think it's very mixed though.
It's nuanced. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. But yes, what I wanted to get to today was just examples and situations and thoughts about how I've realized like how I think about and I might even say idealize Korea. It's a fantasy that was from 1975 and it's just not true anymore. So I'll start with some more lighthearted ones.
Yeah.
Language. I still remember the first time I was in LA visiting some Korean store with my wife in Koreatown. And I don't know, they were like, I forgot, I was getting fitted for a suit, I believe. And they were like, oh, take off your shirt. I was like, oh, should I take 난닝고도 벗을까요? And of course I didn't even speak that well, but I said, oh, 난닝고도? And I remember all 3 of the ladies in the room just started cracking up.
Yeah.
Like, 난닝고?
Yeah.
Like, t-shirts or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm embarrassed. Like, I'm flushing, I'm blushing, I'm red.
Yeah.
Because I grew up thinking undershirt, like the white beater thing, whatever, the BYC.
Yeah.
It's a 난닝고.
Yeah.
But, anyway, like, why is that funny? Why would you think that's a modern Korean person, in their 40s, let's say? Why would they think that's funny?
Because it's I think it's an outdated word. Of course, they would understand.
Yeah.
It's definitely a word that I used when I was growing up. But all of a sudden, no one uses it anymore because I think the perception is that word itself is kind of 촌스러워.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
촌스러워. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like 난닝구. You know what 난닝구 means?
Yeah, you explained it to me actually. It's a running man or something.
Yeah, it's running shirts.
Running-gu. Okay.
In I think pronounced in Japanese.
Yeah. So my understanding is like Koreans are trying to remove any trace of Japanese colonialism.
Yes.
So they're in general trying to replace the Japanese inspired or influenced words with modern Korean words.
Yes. I think that's pretty exact.
But t-shirts is not a Korean word either. Come on.
Or I think if it's actually a white beater, I think I would call it more of a 속옷.
속옷. Okay. That's a Korean
undershirt.
word. Okay. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Anyway, they told me it's t-shirts. But the other common one is when you're eating jjajangmyeon, that yellow thing that you eat with.
Yes.
What do you call that?
단무지.
단무지.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I grew up calling that dakwan.
Dakwan. Yeah. Again, a lot those things I'm very used to hearing when I was little.
Yeah.
The 아저씨s, the adults when I was little, they used to call it dakwan.
And therefore you called it dakwan. But do you remember when you started calling it 당무지?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. I don't know.
Okay. But at some point it flipped.
Yeah.
Okay.
And on the context of eating jjajangmyeon, you know what they used to call the chopsticks?
That you eat jjajangmyeon with?
Yeah,
They have a specific name?
the old name.
No, I have no idea.
Not necessarily for jjajangmyeon,
Yeah.
but the wooden chopsticks.
Oh, in general?
Yeah.
I mean, they're chokodak, right?
That's what they
Korean,
call it
right?
in modern
Oh,
Korea.
okay. I didn't know there was another word.
When like the people who call 단무지 닭광 would call them waribashi or something.
Ooh.
It's just Japanese for chopsticks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, I grew up calling them chokodak and dakwan, but yeah, anyway.
Yeah, 닭광's also Japanese.
Yeah,
For
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a lot of them, it comes from Japanese words.
Yeah. And I totally get the desire to replace it.
Yeah.
But anyway, these are just moments where it's very clear to me.
Yeah.
Like my parents, Korean, and everything I've learned from them about Korea, even the language and everything, it's just outdated.
Yeah.
Jun.
Yeah.
What's the word for echo?
Echo, 메아리.
메아리.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a beautiful word?
Was that a beautiful word? Yeah, it's a beautiful word. I think we call it 순 우리말, like pure Korean. That doesn't come from a Chinese character. It usually sounds very pure, innocent, and beautiful.
And do you have any other thoughts about that word?
메아리, like you have to give me a context though.
I remember when the first time you told me that word.
Yeah.
You said it sounds old.
Oh, it does sound old. Oh, I remember when you said like, why wouldn't Korean people call an elevator a 승강기?
Yeah. Versus modern day, it's always
we just call it
elevator.
Elevator.
Yeah.
Or just like elbe
for
short. And I think that's when I said that it sounds North Korean.
Yeah.
Because North Korea always they try to say the Korean word for whatever is important.
You said the same thing about miari, the word for echo.
Yeah.
You said, "Oh, that sounds like what a North Korean would say."
I think it's because you were proposing that as an app name.
Yes.
And if that's an app name, it sounds like an app from North Korea. 미아리. I think if there are Korean listeners listening to this podcast, they would definitely agree.
Yeah. But my point with this is that I think modern Koreans would say the 1975 Korean mentality, South Korean mentality, is more like how North Koreans think than modern Koreans. That's my point.
Yeah. I think it's because of the economic stage, right? 1970s, South Korea is probably what North Korea is right now.
Oh, okay. Yes, economically, that's true too. But I don't think you can blame the cultural shift on purely economic change.
Yeah. Economic growth also is related to internationalization.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, I think more Western influences. And obviously, South Korea wouldn't even be here without, I think, America. So yeah, that's true. June, that example with elevator is interesting, right? Because I brought that up because I remember my dad seeing a sign and it's saying elevator, right? In Hangul, in Korean. And him just going on like a mini rant. My dad's not the type to rant, but he was clearly like, mildly annoyed and disgusted. Like, why would they use this word? There's a perfectly good Korean word for it.
Yeah.
Right. So, he understands if it's a new word, okay, there's no Korean word for it. Why not adopt the English word for it? Right. But I think he takes issue when a perfectly good Korean word exists for something and Koreans now just adopt the English word for it and then transliterate it into Hangul. And I'll be honest, for me, it's convenient.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think 30% of what I read is just English converted into Hangul.
Yeah.
So I don't need to know the Korean word. So it's great for me. But I also think I think it's absurd. It's too much. Yeah.
Really? Can you give me another example other than elevator?
If we go to the poke restaurant and the list of ingredients on the menu, I think actually it was 100% just taking English words and turning into Korean to the point of I can't say for certain, but
like for instance, onion is
onion instead of yangpa, right? I think that's too much, right? It might be like what they're trying to accomplish, like we're a Western restaurant. But I don't know. Those types of things I see a lot. Yeah.
I think the Korean perception of using English, there's always a sense of more edgy, more sophisticated, right? So I see this a lot. So a good example is color, right? In everyday usage, let's say a red shirt, I would call it 빨간색.
Yeah.
But like in fashion, right? They want to be edgy
Yeah.
and sophisticated. They always say like red
I see.
or like 그린.
Yeah.
Which I think that's kind of silly,
Yeah.
but it's my personal opinion.
I see.
But I think in the same way, when you're describing something that's related to technology,
Yeah.
they tend to use English a lot, and therefore this is just my personal interpretation.
Yeah.
And I think that's why Koreans would like to call it elevator
Yeah.
more than 승강기 because it's technology.
Okay, maybe I can see that. I don't know.
For instance, the table.
Table.
Right? They don't call it.
식탁.
I mean, they could call it 식탁,
Yeah.
but nowadays they will call it table.
Yeah, well, like why?
Yeah.
It's just edgy?
Maybe.
But it's actually okay, it's one thing when you're using it for effect, but it's actually replacing 식탁, right? Like in 5 years, maybe 90% of the time it's just referred to as table. I don't know. I feel like you're losing your culture in that sense. And to me, it's sad. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's becoming a little bit too much too.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think I've told you before personally, but there was this one time at work, this coworker literally used the word at the end of the day while we were having a conversation in Korean.
Yeah.
Like blah, 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 blah Korean. And then she said, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah.
And then started going on in Korean.
Yeah.
Which I thought was like, wow, even for me.
It's a flex, right? Plexu.
Like, why would you say that word at the end of the day in Korean?
Well, is there a good way to say that in Korean? Like, ultimately, anyway, all roads lead to.
I mean, it loses a little bit of nuance, definitely.
Uh-huh.
Maybe it's that's the reason why that person used that to like 100% convey the nuance too. But then...
But the audience wouldn't perceive that nuance.
That's
right?
That's my point. It
It's
was
just a
so...
flex.
Yeah. I don't know. 결국에는...
What's that mean?
Eventually.
Oh, eventually.
Yeah.
Okay. One question is that speaker, are they Korean American or are they just pure Korean?
They're pure Korean.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it sounds like a flex. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's something I would do, right? It's like, I can't think of the right Korean word. So I'll just like insert English here. Yeah.
Okay. You know what this reminds me of? Give me like 15 seconds.
Okay.
There was a meme. It's referring to a fashion magazine called Vogue. Have you heard of Vogue?
I know Vogue, very famous.
So there's Vogue Korea, obviously, too.
Yeah.
And the way that they write their articles
Yeah.
is so absurd
Okay.
that there was a meme, and we call it 보고 an internet meme.
Uh-huh.
Like Vogue stupid.
Oh, okay.
Stupid saying.
Yeah.
I'll just read a short snippet of what a 보고 is.
Okay.
I'm not even joking. This is what it actually says in the magazine.
Yeah.
컨템포러리 무드를 기반으로 매 시즌마다 지플리시만의 3 밸류인 모던함과 크리에이티비티를 지플리시만의 방식으로 웨어러블하게 재해석하여 클래식과 미니멀리즘 옷의 컨트라스트를 지향하는 브랜드로서.
So like at every opportunity, they're just converting the English word into Hangul.
Yeah. This is the famous 보고.
Okay, but don't you think that's where Korean language is going?
Yeah, if that is, I'm a bit worried.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, at that point, we should just convert to using pure English. I don't know.
Or unify with North Korea to even it out.
I think here's one example. I think when I was maybe 10 years old, so it should have been like, I don't know, mid 90s. Yeah, one of my cousins from Korea came to visit and stay with us. And again, for context, my 할머니, my grandma who lived with us in America, on my mom's mom, she left Korea in like the mid 80s, basically to help raise me. But anyway, this cousin, he was staying with us, and my grandma gifted him $100. And my grandmother had made some money through babysitting local Korean kids in the neighborhood or whatever. But my cousin's first reaction was, 할머니, is this all you're giving me?
Really?
And I wanted, even as a 10-year-old, I remember I wanted to beat the living whatever out of him. because this is so rude and disrespectful to me, right?
Yeah.
And I know how hard my grandma worked for that money.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I never got $100 from my grandma.
$100 is a lot. Especially
that's
when
what
you
I
were
thought.
about 10.
That's what I thought. This
Yeah.
would have been mid-90s, right? But that was his first answer out of his mouth. And
how old was that person?
he was, I think he's 1 year younger than me. So
Maybe he didn't even know what he was talking about.
I think
or like
he
the
knew.
value of the money.
Yeah, no, I think he knew. At the time, I thought this was just a one-off, like, oh, this guy is maybe just spoiled or whatever. But I think realizing it now too, I will say seeing, oh man, this is dangerous because it's very like cancel material. But seeing how modern Koreans raise their kids, I realize I am way more strict and high discipline, I believe, and higher accountability and higher manners, etc. Than what I see, at least a lot of other modern Korean, well-to-do parents raising their kids, as far as, for example, like their behavior at the playground or how much junk food and candy they eat, how picky they are, just like having the iPad available to them 24/7 at restaurants just to keep them quiet. Anyway, like I know I'm blending a lot of aspects of parenting together.
Yeah.
But in general, I would say I feel like me as a Korean American has a much higher level of default discipline and expectation for my children than I see a lot of like maybe modern Koreans raising their kids. So I don't know. I know obviously you're not a parent, Jun, but does this resonate with you at all?
It does resonate with me, but I don't know why. It is. I think it is a fact.
Yeah.
Something that I can suspect is because. And now when I say that, I don't know why you aren't like that.
Yeah.
Maybe it's like a backlash of how they were raised, right?
Yeah, it's the trauma.
They were like restricted too much, suppressed too much, so they want to give as much freedom and liberty for their kids, is what I think.
Yeah.
But like then, if I say this, I don't know why you're not like that though, because you were raised up by the same type of parents, right?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I mean, this is complicated. I was the youngest of three, so I got way less discipline than my older siblings. They had it way worse, honestly, 5 to 10 times worse than I did. But also, I think, I guess I'm pretty happy with how my life turned out.
Yeah.
And so from that perspective, kind of worked out, right? And so maybe if my life, I felt very unsatisfied or unhappy, maybe I'd have a backlash in a sense to that. So
I'm more on your side. Like if I ever had kids, I think I would want to raise not exactly the way that I was raised, but I don't want them to grow up spoiled or like have everything that they want. Yeah.
I will say in defense of modern Korean parents, they one person I had a conversation with, they said, I basically know how hard their life will be in the future.
Yeah.
And so I want to have them be happy now. And that broke my heart. That's like such a sad mindset.
Yeah.
Like their future is inevitably bleak.
Yeah.
So let me give them some sunlight now.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway. So I don't think Korean parents are ill-intentioned at all. I want to be clear. I do not think my way of parenting is better or worse. I'm just merely highlighting like what I see as a very obvious difference. Yeah.
Some people claim that it's because of 오은영.
What's
오은영 선생님?
Oh, now we're really gonna get canceled.
I'm just saying I don't necessarily agree on that point of view, but there definitely are people, especially the recent scandals of like kids behaving to their teachers in school and all that.
Yeah.
Some people were blaming 오은영 선생님.
Yeah.
Not necessarily for her way of educating children per se, but it's some people claim that it's because certain parents understands a very limited aspect of the whole education philosophy of 오은영,
what she's saying,
and misinterpreting that to thinking that you have to give anything that the child wants, right?
That's a very well said statement, I think, Jun, and I agree with it. So for listeners, Eun-young, right? She's a child psychologist who is very popular in Korea, and I think she preaches a more soft, I think in the West we'd call it gentle parenting. But you're right. It's not that she advocates for no boundaries.
Yeah.
And I think maybe a lot of Koreans listen to what she says and carries it too far. Anyway, just modern day Korea is nothing like I imagined it to be. There's another one of our listeners and good friends. Their parents are visiting Korea right now. And, they're
the States.
From the States, where they also immigrated, I think, around the same time my parents did. The way my friend puts it is their parents haven't been back since like the late 90s.
Mm.
And so two things I want to call out that he shared. One, before they came here, I mentioned this on a previous episode, but before they came here, they insisted on bringing a ton of cash. They were like, son, you don't know. Korea is a cash operated society.
Oh, wow.
And he asked me, he's like, yo, DK, is this true? And I'm like, no. Like, you don't need any cash in Korea. And the only time I use cash is when I need to manually refill my transit card. Before I got one that was integrated with my credit card. Anyway.
Me using my credit card as my transit card.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever used cash in 3 years.
Yeah.
I think the only time when you need cash is at weddings.
But even there, you can wire transfer now.
That's true. But I think that's like
Too
not too classy.
I get it. Yeah. But no, so I convinced him. I don't actually know the conclusion of that, whether his parents traveled with a boatload of cash or not. But I told him, like, absolutely, you do not need to bring cash. And then two, this is a very recent update. He was telling me, his parents, when they were visiting to Korea, I think they're retired or of retirement age. So this trip for them, they were going to be here, I think, 3 months, was for them to decide, are we, should we maybe move back and retire in Korea? And so he told me his parents were expecting Korea to be slower paced, chill life. And actually, after being here, now a month, his parents told him, like, actually, Korea's way, way, way busier than America. Life is a lot slower in the US. And so, just highlighting again, like, their mentality of Korea, having grown up here, let's say in the 50s, 60s, 70s, compared to what it is now, 50 years later, just completely different.
But I want to ask, where did they come from in the US and where did they visit in Korea?
Good question. I suspect they're spending a lot of time in Seoul. I don't know where they moved from in Korea, but I also know I think they spent all their lives in Las Vegas.
I see.
So it's like, Las Vegas is not the biggest city, but it's a pretty modern city. Oh, pretty chill.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'd say it's, to be honest, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I want to say that I do generally agree on the fact that Korea is more, I guess, hyper in their pace compared to the US.
Yeah.
But I also want to stress that they came to the most hyper city in Korea.
Seoul, yeah.
And there are places that Korean people go to retire, which is like the 시골s, right?
Oh, that's a good one. Where do Seoul people retire to in Korea?
I think a lot of times they would move out to the outskirts of Gyeonggi-do, right?
Oh.
Like Yangpyeong. Like, I think I know one of my friend's parents retired and went to Yangpyeong.
Okay.
Or like Gangwon-do, like by the beach,
Yeah.
right? They get a little apartment by the beach and then those places are definitely way more chill than Seoul.
Okay, agreed. Yeah, I understand.
Even here, like Bundang, I feel it's a
chiller.
little bit more chiller than.
It's a little chiller.
Yeah.
But even still, I feel pretty confident saying the only city that can compare to Seoul that might not be less chill than Seoul is New York. Yeah. So outside of New York in the U.S., everywhere is just way slower pace of life than life in Seoul, and even outside of Seoul, like Gyeonggi-do is. Yeah.
And also a lot of there was a trend back like 3 years ago or 5 years ago ish, where a lot of even young people went down to Jeju-do to live because they wanted to have a more chill life. Definitely, if you wanted to retire, I think Jeju-do could be a good place too.
Yeah. There's a few more things I'd like to bring up. So I think out of my father's side, he was one of 5. So him and one of my gomos, they are the ones who left Korea and have spent their entire lives in the States now. And I have 2 uncles, 작은아빠s, and then one gomo also who has been in Korea their whole life, right? And just seeing they're so different, right? The people who have my aunts and uncles who have spent their whole life in Korea, I think they dress nicer, they care about what car they drive, right? They value possessions a lot more, and really feels like they seek status and things like that. Whereas my dad and my aunt in America, again, they're what you might think of as like traditional Asian American immigrants, right? They're just hardworking, save every dollar, never spend anything on themselves, right? Like, growing up, it was the hardest thing buying my mom presents because every Christmas, birthday, whatever, I'd give her something. She'd say thank you. And it would just stay in the closet. She'd never wear it.
Because it was too precious. Oh.
She just, I don't know. Like either she didn't value it or she didn't want to mess it up or like, that's what she just, anything of value that she had, she just saved. Right. And again, it's just the mentality difference, I think. And to be clear, I'm not saying that as a virtue. It's going to waste staying in the closet. Like I wish she had worn the things we bought her, to be clear. But it just, I think, indicates that mentality.
Interesting.
And yeah, anyway, so I just see like they've diverged a lot, right? And, of course they have. Korea's changed a ton in the last 50 years. There's one thing that really highlights this for me. I remember it was some museum, I think the Modern History Museum, right outside of the big palace in Seoul. And I remember seeing this timeline visual. And if I remember right, between the years 1970 and 1980, so 10 years, the average Korea per capita income went up 10x.
Wow.
So it's like if you're, of course, modern days are different, right?
Yeah,
but
yeah.
if you're making $10,000, 10 years later, the average person's making $100,000, right?
Yeah.
And of course, that's going to result in all these changes or whatever. But it really helped me understand. My parents left in the middle of that. And of course, the way that these like exponential graphs go, they left earlier in that curve, right? So they left a very poor Korea. And even if they had come back only 10 years later, it would have been a much more wealthy Korea.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think culture and the related collective mindsets of people living in that culture is kind of like a living organism, right?
Yeah.
It keeps evolving.
Yeah.
And especially like in a society like Korea where the change was so rapid and drastic. Whereas if you move out from that collective mindset and culture, I think it's more like you got a snapshot of that.
Yeah.
That doesn't grow. So I can totally understand the difference between the siblings of your parents. What's interesting to me is that even when I left for the US for 4 years for my graduate school, and I came back after 4 years, I already can feel that I stayed still at certain aspects.
Oh, yeah.
And already these people have moved
on.
Right?
Yeah.
I remember, I don't know exactly what I said, but like I said something and my friend would say, "Oh, no one says that anymore."
Wow. Yeah.
Right? So yeah, I can't even start imagining like what your parents might have thought they came back. Yeah.
I think it's, again, one of the most common themes of our podcast shows. But Korea is such a collectivist mentality that everyone thinks kind of the same way, right?
Exactly.
So if something becomes the considered the modern way of thinking, everyone adopts that mentality.
Yeah.
Whereas in the US, I think you're a lot more free to, if you want to believe in that thing forever, go do it.
Yeah.
Right? No one's going to stop you, or
Yeah.
you're not going to feel pressured in to conforming like everyone else.
That's a reason why sometimes it's so frustrating
Yeah.
as a society because everyone thinks the same.
Yeah.
But also on a brighter note, sometimes it's very hopeful because things that people might think today can totally change like the next year.
Yeah.
And everyone would change their minds. So I want to say that I'm hopeful.
No, I love how you spin everything into like maybe a more positive note.
Yeah.
And I want to be clear. I'm not saying these are negative. It's just, again, highlighting the differences and
Like so
cultures.
for instance, let's say I don't necessarily agree on everything about like the thing around the word konde and all. But I think there are some positive effects of the word konde.
Yeah.
The negative things are that it suppresses the elderlies too much.
Yeah.
But then like
Wait, sorry. Before you go on, we should explain what konde is and the context.
konde, like the closest word of konde in English is boomer.
Yeah. Okay, boomer.
Yeah. In a negative way.
Yeah. So
I think boomer is more neutral than konde.
No.
It's not.
So the boomer generation, yes.
Yeah.
But specifically, okay, boomer was something that was popularized
Yeah.
to make fun of, the older generation.
Yeah, but if you say okay boomer, it's already very negative.
Sarcastic, yeah. I see. But it is said in a negative way.
Yeah, I understand.
And I think konde similarly is the typical, like, what is it? The millennials in Korea referring to like behavior from the baby boomers in Korea. Yeah.
So again, the konde narrative, as soon as that started taking off, everyone just was starting to get so self-conscious, right? Like all the kondes just disappeared all of a sudden. I mean, they're there, but they don't express it anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be a controversial opinion, but if you say that konde is a negative thing,
Yeah.
then it was so fast that everything changed all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Like for instance, in my experience, someone growing up in the 90s and looking at like the old people acting konde,
Yeah.
I would have thought that this is never going to change ever. Like it's in their minds forever. But then look at what it's like now. Like no one behaves that way. And so everyone's so careful about
Yeah,
how
that's
they
true.
treat the younger generation. Yeah.
That is good. I think this conformist mentality can show that Koreans can change at least how they think.
Yeah.
You're right. I think in the U.S., typically these types of conflicts
Mm-hmm.
results in both sides just becoming more deeply entrenched.
Yeah. Like
doubling down on their beliefs
Yeah, for
rather than
instance-
swinging to the other side. Yeah.
Yeah. For instance, I wouldn't be surprised if all of a sudden, like in 3 years, like everyone in Korea is like pro gay marriage or something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
Like
Whereas today it's like so
they just need some trigger and then
Yeah.
everyone would change their mind altogether.
Yeah, I got it. That is the good part of it.
Yeah.
There's a very short story. It's more of a personal family story. You know, last year when my parents visited us here, we took them to the nearby Hyundai department store
In Pangyo.
in Pangyo. And I think it was the first time my dad had ever been in a modern Korean department store. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Right? Like he's never been in one.
Yeah.
It's not that he's been to Korea many times, you know, he
Yeah.
comes frequently,
Mm-hmm.
but he never ever thought to, you know, he has no reason to go to a department store. Right. And I just remember him saying like, oh, your grandfather would have just been amazed that like this is Korea. Like this kind of store can exist in Korea now. And, you know, according to my dad, my grandfather was much more into like fashion and technology and things like this.
Oh wow.
So he would have just been just so, I think, proud of Korea. Of course, my dad doesn't care for any of that. But even him, he was like, this is, you know, it's still hard for him to believe that this is what Korea has become. Again, because the Korea he left was like so poor. There was one thing you mentioned on a previous episode where a lot of Koreans still mentally consider America, right, the developed country, and Korea is a developing country, right? So, and I push back on that because, like, from my perspective, it's not true.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's what I want to talk about today, and just kind of a few points on that. And I think it's, if I had to be honest, though, I kind of, I wish Korea were more like the 70s than it is now. I don't know. It's just it might be a fantasy in my mind, but I feel like a lot of that is lost. Okay, sorry. One very quick example before I ask you to respond. No one gets up for people on the subway anymore. And I'm trying to teach my kids to get up for like the elderly or whatever. But even I'd say 5 years ago, my observation was, I was always taught too, if you're sitting in a seat on the subway and someone older than you boards, you get up and you make sure they take your seat, right? But now it doesn't happen.
Really? I would disagree.
No, I've never seen it happen.
Really?
Modern day, yeah. And even when I give up, and I will also say, even when I give up my seat, a lot of times they refuse. The older person's like, no, you take it. And then I insist, and sometimes they do. But I see it all the time where I'm like, is no one going to tell this, like, you know, young 20s person to get up and give their seat for the 70-year-old person? I'm already standing, right? I can't give up my seat. Yeah, but no one else interrupts, and so I'm not going to, you know, bring it up.
Okay, this is my interpretation. To begin with, I don't necessarily agree.
Wait, you really don't. You think your average Korean would still give up their seat for the elderly?
Yes. And I see that all the time.
Yeah.
Though what I want to say is, for one thing, 70-year-olds back 5 years ago and the 70-year-olds right now, if you compare them, the 70-year-olds these days don't look like 70-year-olds.
You can't tell they're
5 years
70.
ago.
You can't tell they're 70. I agree with that.
And then number two, sometimes these people get offended if I offer my seat.
Yeah,
How old do you think I am?
I can see that. I agree with these points.
But let's say if you see a obviously very old looking person,
yeah,
I wouldn't think that anyone would hesitate to give up their seat.
Oof. It might be confirmation bias for me.
Yeah.
But I would say 9 times out of 10, the young person would not give it up for a very visibly elderly Korean. Yeah.
Really? Maybe you're right. Maybe.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I want to say that I also agree that modern day Korea needs a little bit of more the 70s mentality in a way that there was much more a sense of humanity in the 70s. Like when you see K-dramas like 응답하라 1988, was that? Like
Reply 1988, right?
Yeah. I've never watched that drama before.
Yeah.
But I watch their shorts a lot.
Yeah.
And they have these scenes that depict how they were like amongst their neighbors.
Yeah.
And it's so heartwarming.
Yeah.
And I experienced that when I was little, right?
Yeah.
Let's say when I was little and I go to my house and the house is locked, I wouldn't hesitate to knock to my neighbor and say like, "Oh, mom's not here. Can I stay?" And everyone was like, "Come in." And it's like, give me like a meal, right?
That's unheard of, I think, in modern day society.
Yeah, it would just never happen.
Yeah.
And like they would sue the hell each other out if that happens.
How dare you take my son in, like give him food, I'm gonna sue you.
Yeah. This is another like also the same thing but in a negative aspect of how Korean society changes so drastically.
Yeah.
And like it's so too extremely the other way.
Yeah.
Right?
I want to provide the counterpoint to the subway story though. Maybe it's a similar point, but at least when I'm on the subway with my kids, people will get up.
Yeah.
But only a specific kind of person.
The old
people. Yeah. No, it's I think anyone who's older, they see kids like they're delighted. Their face lights up. They like make sure they sit, take their seat or whatever. I think everyone else, let's say like 20 to 40, 20 to 50, they just see them as a nuisance. They're more judging me like, why would you bring kids on the subway? Don't you know better? But it's always the elderly who 100% of the time will give up their seats for our kids.
Yeah,
so,
I believe that.
Very heartwarming.
Yeah, maybe I'm not the one to represent the people these days. I'm already old in that aspect.
Yeah. Is there anything, Jun, from your childhood? You mentioned the kind of neighborly aspect. Is there anything more culturally or mindset, collective mindset wise that you miss from, your childhood?
This is not even necessarily my childhood, but I think there was a sense of humility or also sense of you shouldn't, like, money is not everything, right? That kind of value.
Yeah.
It's just all of a sudden just disappeared. And like no one would even think twice about how money is the most important value.
Yeah.
I saw this survey, which is very sad, done amongst the OECD countries.
Yes. Yeah.
The values that each society
I think I saw this survey.
values the most. And like I think all the other countries, number one was like family.
Yeah.
And then only Korea, I think it was money or something, right?
Isn't that crazy?
That's kind of sad.
Yeah. Because again, when I think of Korean values, I would definitely say things like, family first, right? Sacrifice, things like that. But I don't, again, I really don't think that's what modern Korea is.
Yeah. I wish people had a little bit of shame in that.
I think most Koreans look at that and say, obviously, yeah.
Like if you look at Instagram stories, it's crazy how people are bragging of like their hokkangsu and like how they're flying, first class to somewhere and all that. And it looks silly.
Yeah.
It looks silly. And I hope that people understood that it looks weird and silly.
Yeah.
But anyways.
No. Korea has the highest level of elderly poverty. The elderly poverty rate in Korea is number one of all OECD or developed countries.
Yeah.
Anyway, anything else you wanted to cover today?
No, I think this was also a good episode.
Okay. Yeah. I like this one. So yeah. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening.
As always, we value your support. Follow us at Instagram. Oh God.
At Korean American Podcast on Instagram
and YouTube as well.
And I also wanted to stress that I really enjoy reading the comments on all of our content, and I wish our listeners, if you are listening, we would really appreciate if you leave comments on what you think or in general, like if you want to interact with us. I think that's super fun and valuable for us.
Yeah, I also really love reading the comments. Yeah. It means a lot, so thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Bye. Sorry, 보고 literally
is a swear word, so I don't know if we want to.
Oh, is?
Yeah.
No, is it?
Retard.
But that's not is it a swear word?
Yeah.
Oh. It's not like idiot.
It's idiot.
But it's like it's considered a swear word in Korea.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we probably can't put this in, yeah.
Or we should beep it.
Oh, 보고 See, that's another. Okay, when we talk about languages more,
Yeah.
we should get into that. How like swearing in each other's languages, you don't understand like the severity of it.
Yeah.